I was 18 the night everything in my life cracked open. The storm had been building since noon, heavy gray clouds stacking over Portland, Maine, until the whole sky looked bruised. By the time the sun dipped behind the pine trees, the rain came down in sheets so thick the street lamps blurred like smudged chalk. I stood in the doorway of our old gray house, soaked from my knees down, holding a small green bill between my fingers. $20. That was all my parents thought I needed to start my life. That was all they thought I was worth. The house behind me had never been perfect, but it had been mine once. The siding had peeled for years, showing streaks of raw wood every time the wind scraped the walls. The porch steps sank slightly in the middle, creaking when anyone heavier than our cat walked across them. My mother always said repairs could wait because money needed to go where it mattered. And where it mattered was almost always my sister Clara. Her cheerleading trips. Her new jacket with a real fur trim. Her weekend lessons in Boston cost more than I made in a month working part-time. My father, Daniel, didn't say much as he stood in the doorway. He didn't need to. His silence had always carried more weight than any shouting. He just shifted his stance, stepped back from the porch light, and looked at me in a way that told me everything was already decided. My mother, Marianne, stood beside him with one hand resting gently on Clara's shoulder, like she was comforting the wrong daughter. Clara's face glowed in the warm light from inside. She wore a red sweater that Mom had bought for her last week when I had asked for help purchasing my textbooks and been told to find a way. I realized in that moment that I was not going back inside. I wasn't returning to my room. I wasn't going to see my familiar quilt spread neatly across my bed or the little lamp shaped like a lighthouse sitting on my desk. I wasn't going to sit at the dinner table again or hear the hum of the old refrigerator while I studied late at night. My suitcase was on the porch already, zipped and waiting. They had packed it for me. Not a note, not a goodbye, not a single sign that my leaving caused even a passing ache in them. When the door shut behind me, the sound echoed across the yard. It wasn't just wood meeting wood. It felt like a verdict. The porch light flickered once, as if even it had second thoughts, then steadied into a dull yellow halo. I stepped off the porch and into the rain, feeling the cold strike my skin like needles. I didn't look back.
I didn't trust myself to.
I walked down the street until the house disappeared behind the curtain of rain. Every window I passed showed a different kind of warmth. Families gathered around glowing televisions. Mothers carrying folded laundry. Kids racing down hallways with the kind of joy that echoes in walls that have never known shouting or suspicion. Those windows made me feel like I was staring into a world that had rejected me before I even understood why. My shoes were soaked through within minutes. Water seeped into my socks, ran down my jacket sleeves, and collected in the cuffs of my jeans. The wind whipped around corners and stole my breath every time I tried to breathe too deeply. I hugged my suitcase to my chest and tried to think of somewhere to go. A friend's house. A classmate's couch. But I had always been the one people forgot to invite, the one who stayed quiet in the back of classrooms, the one who worked extra hours instead of going to parties. When you spend your life unnoticed, you don't build many places to land. After 2 hours of wandering the streets, shivering and exhausted, I found an awning behind a small grocery store. It wasn't much, but it kept the rain off my face. I set my suitcase down and curled up beside it. My body ached from the cold. My throat burned. I pressed the $20 bill into my palm until the edges bent and softened. That green paper felt like the whole story of my life, folded into a single symbol. Too small. Too easy to discard. I kept replaying the moment on the porch. My father's steady voice told me I needed to stand on my own now. My mother's hand on Clara's shoulder. The quiet approval in the air around them. In their world, praise moved upward, always toward Clara, always toward the girl who shone. Silence settled downward, and it landed on me like dust no one bothered to brush away. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time a car rattled past or a gust of wind hit the metal awning above me, my heart jumped. I felt small and exposed, like I was balancing on the edge of a world that didn't have a place for me anymore. I was scared. I won't pretend I wasn't. But behind the fear, tiny and stubborn, there was something else. A spark. A whisper in the back of my mind saying that if no one came to save me, then I would have to learn how to save myself. Sometime before dawn, while the rain softened into a mist, I made myself a promise. Not out loud, not in any dramatic way, but in the quiet place inside me that still believed I could be more than what they had decided. I promised that if the world didn't want to keep me, then I would build a place that did. Even if I had to start with cold hands, wet clothes, and a heartbeat that refused to quit. That was the beginning. The night I lost everything. The night I became something else. The night I stepped into a future I would have to build from nothing. The years that followed felt like walking through a long, unlit tunnel with no map and no promise of an exit. I drifted from place to place across Portland, trying to stay dry, trying to stay warm, trying to stay alive. The 20 I carried from that night on the porch shrank quickly. I stretched it as far as I could, but hunger ate it faster than I expected. I learned how to ration granola bars. I learned which shelters filled up early. I learned that people living on the edge could always recognize one another by the way they scanned every room for risk. My first shelter was a converted gym with folding mats spread across a hardwood floor. The ceiling echoed with every cough and every restless turning. Some nights, I lay awake listening to the hum of rain against the roof and wondered if my parents were sleeping peacefully, unaware or unconcerned about where I had gone. Other nights, exhaustion swallowed those thoughts before they could grow teeth. One morning, a volunteer told me about Providence, Rhode Island, and said jobs were easier to find there. I had no plan beyond survival, so I walked to the bus station with my suitcase dragging behind me like a tired limb. I bought a one-way ticket for most of what I had left. When I stepped off the bus in Providence, the air felt cleaner, sharper, almost hopeful. I told myself it was a fresh start, even though I had no home to return to. The first job I found was at a small diner called Millie's Corner. I washed dishes for $8 an hour, my hands constantly pruned from hot water and soap. The work was rough and endless, but it gave me a reason to get up each morning. I slept on a cot in a church basement where the lights never fully turned off. The glow was dim, but it cast long shadows that made me feel watched even when the room was quiet. I developed a cough that wouldn't fade. The dampness in the basement seeped into my bones. One winter night, I ran a fever so high I couldn't stand without the room tilting. A volunteer nurse named Carol sat beside me and pressed a cool cloth to my forehead. She told me I needed rest, real rest, but I knew I couldn't afford to miss work. Missing work meant losing hours. Losing hours meant losing meals. Survival didn't allow for weakness. So I dragged myself back to the diner the next morning, gripping counters and walls until the dizziness passed. Still, something inside me refused to die. As the months rolled on, I saved every spare dollar. I skipped bus rides and walked miles. I bought nothing extra. I ate cheaply. I worked overtime whenever someone called out sick. After a full year, I had saved $1,000. It felt unreal. I kept counting it, afraid it would disappear if I looked away. It was the first thing in my life that truly belonged to me. With that small cushion, I enrolled in 2-night classes at the community college. Accounting was the first. I didn't expect to like it, but numbers made sense in a way people never had. They were honest. They didn't change their tone or their truth based on who stood in the room. The second class was something called systems mapping. I signed up for it because the instructor, a woman named Dr. Howell, said it could help me understand how companies worked behind the scenes. I had never heard anyone talk about the invisible structure of workplaces before, but once I learned, I couldn't unsee it. Every diner shift, every bus ride, every warehouse loading dock had lines connecting tasks and people and choices. If you understood those lines, you understood power. And for the first time, I realized I might be able to build something for myself if I could follow those lines far enough. I studied constantly. I asked questions even when my voice shook. I wrote notes on napkins, on old receipts, on the paper sleeves from coffee cups. Some nights, I stayed after class to talk to instructors who seemed surprised by how hungry I was to learn. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I had simply discovered what it felt like to grow. Back at the diner, small changes started happening. One night, the manager quit suddenly after an argument with the owner. Chaos hit the kitchen. Orders were lost. Inventory lists were scattered. People yelled over one another. I stepped into the back room, pulled out the last inventory sheet I had quietly updated that morning, and showed the owner where everything stood. He looked stunned, as if he had never considered the possibility that I was capable of something more than scrubbing plates. I didn't know I had value until someone finally noticed it. 2 years after I reached Providence, I applied for an assistant position at a warehouse coordination company called Northline Logistics. The office was old, the carpet frayed, the desks mismatched. They gave me a dusty side office no one wanted, tucked behind a file cabinet, and a buzzing fluorescent light. But it had a door, a desk,
A chair.
a window the size of a shoebox. To me, it looked like a throne room. From that room, everything changed. I learned workflow design, scheduling systems, and crisis coordination. I learned how to turn chaos into order, how to streamline processes that were falling apart, and how to build trust with people who had stopped trusting anyone. Soon, people from other departments came to me for help. At first shyly, then urgently, like they finally saw me. By the end of the year, I wasn't the assistant anymore. I was the person everyone relied on when things collapsed. I had climbed from a cot in a basement to a place where my mind mattered. It all began with a borrowed desk and a hunger so deep it refused to die. That was the seed of everything. And I guarded it like a flame I had struck from nothing. By the time I turned 23, I had rebuilt enough of myself to take a real risk. Providence had given me stability, but I knew I couldn't grow there forever. I wanted more than steady paychecks and borrowed office space. I wanted to build something of my own, something that couldn't be taken from me the way my family had taken my first home. So I packed my life into 2 suitcases, bought a bus ticket, and moved west to Cleveland, Ohio. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a place where opportunities didn't feel quite so gated. The bakery above which I rented my first office smelled like warm sugar and rising dough every morning. The ceiling in my tiny room trembled each time the mixer downstairs kicked on, and sometimes powdered sugar drifted through the vents and settled on my desk like strange snow.
I didn't mind.
I paid $400 a month for that space, and even that felt like a miracle. The room had a crooked window, peeling paint, and a desk I found at a thrift shop for $25. But it was mine. Mine in a way nothing had ever been before. I named my company Westbridge Operations Group because I wanted a name that sounded bigger than the room I worked in. At first, my only client was a small local distributor who needed help organizing inventory that had been mismanaged for years. I worked late nights, built systems from scratch, and created spreadsheets that would have made my accounting instructor proud. They recommended me to another client, then another. Within 6 months, I had 8 contracts, all small but enough to keep me standing. I didn't have the sparkling charm my sister Clara always carried like a natural perfume. I didn't need it. What I had was discipline, precision, a stubbornness that had carried me through shelters and sickness and nights where I slept with a coat pulled over my head to stay warm. That stubbornness built my company faster than I expected. By the 5th year, Westbridge had grown into something real. We had an office 3 times bigger in a renovated brick building with tall windows and hardwood floors. I hired employees who understood my vision. I signed contracts worth more than $200,000 annually. I bought a leather chair that didn't wobble and added a plant by the window that somehow stayed alive no matter how much I forgot to water it. I stood at the window sometimes, watching the street below, stunned by the life I had shaped out of air and grit. I thought the past was behind me until one quiet morning changed everything. It was a Tuesday, and the office smelled like fresh coffee and printer ink. I was reviewing a workflow design for a client when my assistant, Lauren, knocked softly and stepped inside. She held a hesitant expression I didn't see often. When I asked who was waiting to see me, she paused long enough that my heart tightened. "It's a woman," she said. "She said she knows you." I knew before I heard the name.
Clara.
I felt the years collapse around me, dragging the rain-soaked porch, the $20 bill, and the sound of a closing door back into my chest. I nodded, even though part of me wanted to run. Instead, I straightened my posture and said she could come in. When Clara stepped through the doorway, the air seemed to shift. She looked older, though not by much. Her blonde hair was still the same familiar shade, but it lacked the easy bounce it once had. Her clothes were neat, but not new. She carried a resume in her hand, folded once across the middle like she had gripped it too tightly. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said my name in a tone that carried both surprise and something like regret. She told me she had been looking for work for months. She told me she heard I had started a company here in Cleveland and that people spoke well of me. Her eyes flickered around the office, taking in the polished floors, the organized shelves, the quiet hum of professionalism. I could see the realization settle slowly across her face. Her forgotten sister had become someone. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it breathe. I let her feel what it was like to stand in a space she had once believed I would never reach. Finally, I asked her the same question I would have asked any applicant. What skills can you bring to the team? She blinked, startled. No one had ever asked her that. She had always been praised for existing, for shining, for simply being Clara. She wasn't used to earning her place. She looked down at her resume as if searching for the right answers. I'm willing to learn, she said quietly. I know I don't have much experience, but I can work hard. I just need someone to give me a chance. Her shoulders trembled the way mine once had when I was 18, standing in the rain with my suitcase and my 20. And despite everything, something in me softened. Not because she was my sister. Not because I owed her anything. But because I understood what it meant to need a chance more than anything else. I hired her, not as a favor. Not out of guilt. Not out of some wish to rewrite the past. I hired her because I believed she could grow if she chose to. But I made the boundaries clear. She would train like everyone else. She would be evaluated like everyone else. She would not leap ahead because of her name, nor fall behind because of our history. And she worked harder than I ever expected. She arrived early. She stayed late. She asked questions without letting pride choke her. Slowly, she began to earn the trust of the team. Not because of who she had been, but because of who she was learning to become. I learned something too. Justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like giving someone the structure they never had. Sometimes it looks like breaking the cycle instead of feeding it. Sometimes it looks like offering the chance you were denied, but offering it in a way that empowers both sides. For the first time in our lives, Clara and I stood on equal ground. The forgotten one and the golden one, now just two women trying to build something better than what we were given. And the door that opened that day didn't just open for her. It opened for me, too. A few months after Clara joined my company and settled into her role, something began to shift inside me. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It didn't show up as anger or grief. Instead, it came quietly, like a soft ache behind the ribs that reminded me there was still one unfinished chapter in my story. I had rebuilt my life in Cleveland. I had forged a career, created a home, earned respect, and learned to stand on ground that no one had handed to me. But the ghosts of Portland still lived somewhere at the edge of my thoughts, drifting in and out whenever I passed a porch light or heard rain against a window. I had avoided going back for 5 years. Part of me believed distance would solve everything. Another part believed that returning would drag me into the past I had worked so hard to escape. But healing is strange. Sometimes it invites us back to the places where the hurt began, not to reopen wounds, but to lay them down. And one morning, while looking out my office window at the quiet Cleveland street below, I knew it was time. The drive to Portland took hours, but it felt like crossing a lifetime. The city changed as I approached. Familiar pine trees lined the roads. The sea breeze carried a faint chill even in summer. The skyline of the small town rose slowly in the distance, and with it, memories I had tried to forget. I gripped the wheel tighter as I turned onto my old street, my chest tightening as though the past was stepping out to greet me before I even parked. When I stopped in front of the gray house, I didn't get out right away. I sat in the car with the engine off, staring at the home that had once held my entire world.
It hadn't changed.
The same chipped siding, the same sagging porch rail, the same uneven steps that creaked under the wrong foot. It was as if time had passed everywhere except here. Their cars were gone. No lights glowed through the windows. The silence made it easier to breathe. I stepped out of the car and walked across the street, each step heavier than the last. It felt strange, like I was walking into a photograph instead of a place that had once been real. Standing at the foot of the porch, I hesitated. For a moment, 18-year-old me was there again, drenched in rain, clutching a suitcase, and a 20 like it was a lifeline. I remembered the sound of the door shutting, the weight of their silence, the cold that sank into my bones as I walked away alone. But I wasn't that girl anymore. My shoulders were steadier. My heart is stronger.
My voice is my own.
I climbed the porch steps and reached into my coat pocket. The 20 rested there, creased in the same careful folds I had made years ago. Not the original bill, but one that carried the same shape, the same symbolism. I had kept it tucked into my wallet, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of how far I had traveled from that night. Now it felt right to let it go. I placed it gently on the railing, smoothing it down with my fingers. The bill fluttered slightly in the breeze, but stayed in place. I didn't attach a note. I didn't need to. This wasn't a message for them. It was a message for me.
A release.
Stepping back from the porch, I felt a subtle shift inside my chest. Something loosened there, something that had been locked for too long. It wasn't joy, and it wasn't grief. It was space. A quiet recognition that I no longer carried what they had done to me. I wasn't returning for closure, because closure wasn't something they could give. I was returning to reclaim the version of myself who had been thrown into the rain and told to survive. I walked back to my car feeling lighter. As I drove away, I watched the house shrink in the rearview mirror. For the first time, it looked small, even fragile. Not powerful, not defining. Just a building that had once held people who never understood me. And I realized then that the home I had built in Cleveland, with my team and my work and the steady rhythm of the life I shaped, was stronger than anything that house could ever have offered. When I returned to the office later that week, I gathered my team for a brief meeting. I didn't share my whole story. Not the rain. Not the shelters. Not the illness or the hunger or the nights I worked until my hands shook. But I told them enough. I said the company existed because someone had once told me I didn't deserve a future. I told them that sometimes the world hands you a door slammed shut and expects you to disappear. But I didn't disappear. I built a door of my own. The room was quiet for a long moment. Not out of pity, but out of understanding. My employees didn't see me as someone broken by the past. They saw me as someone who had forged a path through it. A few days later, Clara asked if she could speak with me privately. When she stepped into my office, she held herself with the caution of someone who is trying to learn how to be gentle in a world that had always expected her to be perfect. She asked if I had gone home. I nodded. She didn't ask for details. She simply said she hoped I found whatever I needed. And I had. The 20 on the porch wasn't a challenge or a statement. It was a release of the value they once assigned me. For years, that bill had been the symbol of who they believed I was. Now, it stayed where it belonged, back in the place where the story began. As the weeks passed, I felt something new growing in me. Not triumph. Not revenge. Something steadier.
Peace.
The kind that doesn't erase the past but sits beside it, unafraid. I still think about the people out there standing in their own rain, holding their own small bill, believing the world has already judged what they are worth. I wish I could tell them what I learned. That value isn't handed to you. It's built. It's shaped. It's claimed. And when the moment comes, they get to choose who they become. Not the forgotten one. Not the abandoned one. But the one who stood up, walked forward, and built a future from nothing but determination. That is the story I leave behind. My story. The future I claimed. The peace I chose.